PANS Ops. This outlines recommended procedures for departure, approach, holding, etc. The assumption is that all engines are operating. Instrument departure procedures ensure acceptable clearance above terrain and obstacles during departure. The design of the procedure is generally dictated by surrounding terrain. There may be specific routes, sectors to avoid, or minimum net climb gradients. Instrument departures. A straight departure means the initial departure track is within 15 degrees of the runway centerline. A turning departure means a turn of more than 15 degrees is needed to avoid an obstacle. Track guidance for a straight departure is for 20 kilometers from the runway. A turning departure has track guidance for 10 kilometers from the runway. Departure procedures are based on all engines' minimum net climb gradient of 3.3%. Instrument approaches. The approach procedure segments are arrival, initial, intermediate, final, and missed approach. For a non-precision straight-in approach, the angle between the final approach track and runway centerline is less than or equal to 30 degrees. Minimum sector altitudes are established for each aerodrome and provide at least 300 meters obstacle clearance within 25 nautical miles. Aircraft categories. Category speeds based on 1.3 times the stall speed in the landing configuration at maximum certificated landing mass. Aircraft category A. The nominal VAT speed is less than 91 knots. B. 91 to 120 knots. C. 121 to 140 knots. D. 141 to 165 knots. And E. 166 to 210 knots. Obstacle clearance. OCA H for precision approaches is the lowest altitude or height above the elevation of the runway threshold at which a missed approach must be initiated. For a non-precision approach, it is the lowest altitude height above aerodrome elevation or threshold elevation if it is more than 2 meters below aerodrome elevation, below which aircraft cannot descend without infringing obstacle clearance criteria. A circling approach is the lowest altitude height above aerodrome elevation below which aircraft cannot descend without infringing obstacle clearance criteria. Operational minima. DAH, altitude or height, in a precision approach at which a missed approach must be initiated if the required visual reference to continue the approach has not been established. MDAH, altitude, height, in a non-precision approach below which descent may not be made without the required visual reference. Approach procedure design. The optimum distance for the final approach fix from the threshold is 5 nautical miles. The maximum distance of the final approach fix from the threshold is 10 nautical miles. The optimum descent gradient for a precision approach is 5%, a 3-degree glide path angle. The obstacle clearance in the primary area of the initial approach segment is 300 meters. In the primary area of the intermediate approach segment, it is 150 meters. Reversal procedures. A reversal procedure is designed to enable aircraft to reverse direction during the initial approach segment of an instrument approach procedure. The sequence may include procedure turns or base turns. A procedure turn is a turn to establish a reciprocal track. A base turn is a turn to intercept an inbound track. The tracks are not necessarily reciprocal. There are two types of procedure turns advocated by ICAO. One where the aircraft turns through 45 degrees from the reciprocal of the inbound track and then flies for 1 minute, typically for a category A or B aircraft, and then turns through 180 degrees to intercept the inbound track. The other is where the aircraft turns through 80 degrees and then through 260 degrees to intercept the inbound track. For base turns, the aircraft turns off the track and flies for 1 minute, 2 minutes or 3 minutes typically, and then turns inbound to intercept the inbound track, and then turns in a direction to intercept the inbound track. Holding. Standard holds are right turns. The turns are made at 25-degree angle of bank or 3 degrees per second, whichever requires lesser bank. The entry to the hold is determined by magnetic heading. Types of entry are parallel, offset, and direct. The outbound still air timing is 1 minute if less than or equal to 14,000 feet altitude, or 1.5 minutes if you are above 14,000 feet. Altimeter setting. Transition altitude. The altitude at or below which the vertical position of an aircraft is controlled by reference to altitude. Transition level. The lowest flight level available for use above the transition altitude. Transition layer. The airspace between transition altitude and transition level. Operations on parallel runways. Simultaneous parallel approaches. Independent parallel approaches. Radar separation minima between aircraft using adjacent ILS is not prescribed. Dependent parallel approaches. Radar separation minima between aircraft using adjacent ILS is prescribed. Secondary surveillance radar. Serviceable transponder should be operated at all times. Mode C should be operated at all times unless otherwise directed by ATC. Contingencies. 7500 unlawful interference, 7600 radio failure, 7700 emergency.